Buddha and Nietzsche Confronted by Bertrand Russell, 1945. Before we begin, we have this photo of Friedrich Nietzsche taken in 1875 with his glorious mustache. On the right, we have a statue of the Buddha made sometime between the 2nd and 3rd century CE. Greetings, everyone. I have said it before, but it would bear repeating here as I introduce our next reading. One interesting aspect of this class is that I see it as a journey across the world and across time, as it will introduce you to thinkers, many of them long dead, who nonetheless have important things to teach us. Thanks to the magic of writing, the very thoughts and ideas of these people are preserved for us to read and think about. Writing and reading, remember, have the power to bring their minds back to life, allowing the dead to speak to us. But it also places us back in time, allowing us to witness events recorded in the memories and on the pages of people like Plato, who preserved the events and people in writing for us, right? We can re-experience the death of Socrates when we read what Plato wrote, right? When we pick up a copy of the Phaedo and read about his final moments. It's a kind of time travel, and it allows us to have conversations with people across the centuries, and even see how conversations unfold across thousands of years. The journey may be imaginary, but it's also real, for writing preserves the past. Taking our imaginary time machine through the power of the written word, we will now make our way from India in the 5th century BCE to England in 1945, where we meet again philosopher Bertrand Russell. And here he is, smoking his pipe and reading something. Though I note this photo is from 1956, we will actually be visiting him a bit earlier, 1945, as the Second World War is ending. Russell is going to do something really interesting now. He is going to use his imagination to time travel and describe a conversation between two people who never met, separated by miles and centuries, yet whom he knows well by the written words they left behind. Because writing is magic and reading is time travel, Russell is able to imagine these people together, talking across time in his own mind. Again, writing makes this possible, and we ourselves are a part of this process as well, because Russell himself is dead and gone. He died 10 years before I was born, in the year 1970. So we bring Russell back to life when we read his words, and Russell does the same for Nietzsche and the Buddha in the piece we are about to read. Philosophy is amazing because it not only allows us to explore ideas, but we do so with the words and thoughts that the dead have left behind. We ourselves get to add to the discussion with our own thoughts for the next generation of people to read and think about. And so philosophy is a great conversation that human beings have been having since writing began. Today, we get to play a part in that. In Buddha and Nietzsche Confronted, Bertrand Russell imagines Prince Siddhartha, better known today as the Buddha, standing before God with Friedrich Nietzsche. In this pretend confrontation, Russell wonders what each would say if he were given a chance to tell God what kind of world to create. Here, Russell casts the Buddha as the embodiment of human sympathy, and Nietzsche, appropriately, as the opposite. The aim of this conversational thought experiment is to decide which one has better wisdom. Who do you think you prefer? Imaginary in every respect, for Russell did not believe in God, but imagines him for the sake of the discussion. The debate he creatively envisions between the two is both entertaining and insightful. It was taken from Russell's History of Western Philosophy, written in 1945 in his chapter on Nietzsche. Let's read it and then consider some of his ideas. Buddha and Nietzsche Confronted by Bertrand Russell, 1945. Russell says, if Buddha and Nietzsche were confronted, could either produce any argument that ought to appeal to the impartial listener? I am not thinking of political arguments. We can imagine them appearing before the Almighty, as in the first chapter of the book of Job, and offering advice as to the sort of world he should create. What could either say? So we're going to imagine, like in the book of Job, and here's a scene from the book of Job. We have Satan, the devil, standing before God. Okay, now imagine that God calls the Buddha and Nietzsche to stand before him, just as the devil is standing before God in the book of Job. Buddha would open the argument by speaking of the lepers, outcast and miserable. I'm going to start over. Buddha would open the argument by speaking of the lepers, outcast and miserable, the poor, toiling with aching limbs and barely kept alive by scanty nourishment, the wounded in battle, dying in slow agony, the orphans, ill-treated by cruel guardians, and even the most successful, haunted by the thought of failure and death. From all this load of sorrow, he would say, a way of salvation must be found, and salvation can only come through love. Nietzsche, whom only omnipotence could restrain from interrupting, would burst out when his turn came. Good heavens, man, and I can't do a German accent, so just pretend I am. Good heavens, man, you must learn to be of tougher fiber. Why go about sniveling because trivial people suffer? Or for that matter, because great men suffer. Trivial people suffer trivially. Great men suffer greatly, and great sufferings are not to be regretted because they are noble. Your ideal is a purely negative one, absence of suffering, which can only be completely secured by non-existence. I, on the other hand, have positive ideals. I admire Alcibiades, a Greek warrior and student of Socrates, that's him on the left, and Emperor Frederick II, a 13th century German king who conquered much of Europe, that's him in the middle, and Napoleon, the French general and emperor, you've probably heard of him, and that's him on the right. For the sake of such men, any misery is worthwhile. I appeal to you, Lord, as the greatest of creative artists. Do not let your artistic impulses be curbed by the degenerate, fear-ridden maunderings, that is, incoherent ramblings. Sorry, I have to read that again. For the sake of such men, any misery is worthwhile. I appeal to you, Lord, as the greatest of creative artists. Do not let your artistic impulses be curbed by the degenerate, fear-ridden maunderings of this wretched psychopath. Buddha, who in the courts of heaven has learned all history since his death, and has mastered science with delight in the knowledge and sorrow at the use to which men will have put it, replies with calm urbanity. And before I read that, so the Buddha, from his place in heaven, has been watching the earth and watching science progress all the way up until 1945, the year that Bertrand Russell is writing his book. And he sees how science has allowed for great good, right? Like antibiotics on one hand, but it's also caused devastation, like atom bombs, like this one falling on Nagasaki in 1945, the same year that Bertrand Russell is writing his book. So science has done amazing things, but it's also done horrible things. And the Buddha watches with delight and sorrow. The Buddha says, "You are mistaken, Professor Nietzsche, in thinking my ideal a purely negative one. True, it includes a negative element, the absence of suffering, but it has, in addition, quite as much that is positive as to be found in your doctrine. Though I have no special admiration for Alcibiades and Napoleon, because these were both, like, people who killed many, right? They're considered heroes, but they killed a lot of people. I too have my heroes. My successor, Jesus, because he told men to love their enemies. The men who discovered how to master the forces of nature and secure food with less labor. The medical men who have shown how to diminish disease." So looking at the scientists, I found two like war-related photos or images for this discussion. We have soldiers on the battlefield using antibiotics. That's the sort of thing that the Buddha approves of. But we also have a devastating weapon that killed millions of people. And the Buddha, of course, does not approve of that. All right, so the men who discovered how to master the forces of nature and secure food with less labor. The medical men who have shown how to diminish disease. The poets and artists and musicians who have caught glimpses of the divine beatitude. Love and knowledge and delight in beauty are not negations. They are enough to fill the lives of the greatest men who have ever lived. All the same, Nietzsche replies, your world would be insipid. You would study Heraclitus. You should study Heraclitus. Heraclitus was an early philosopher who lived before Socrates, most of whose works are now lost or missing, right? Because libraries, burned down and papyrus rotted, and for whatever reason, Heraclitus's writings have not survived until the present day. But according to Russell and his imagination, in heaven, everything Heraclitus wrote is available in heaven. So when we get there, we'll be able to read all these books that we never had a chance to read on Earth. Anyway, all the same, Nietzsche replies, your world would be insipid. You should study Heraclitus, whose works survive complete in the celestial heavenly library. Your love is compassion, which is elicited by pain. All right, so compassion is only possible, Nietzsche says, because pain existed first, right? We can't comfort people unless they're in pain. So pain comes first. You can't have compassion without pain. I think he's trying to say gotcha. Your truth, if you are honest, is unpleasant and only to be known through suffering. And as to beauty, what is more beautiful than the tiger who owes his splendor to his fierceness? No, if the Lord should decide for your world, I fear we should all die of boredom. You might, the Buddha replies, because you love pain, and your love of life is a sham. But those who truly value life and love would be happy as no one can be happy in the world as it is. For my part, Russell says, so this is Russell himself speaking, I agree with Buddha as I have imagined him. But I do not know how to prove that he is right by any argument, such as can be used in a mathematical or scientific question. I dislike Nietzsche because he likes the contemplation of pain, because he erects conceit into a duty, because the men whom he most admires are conquerors, like Napoleon. It's interesting, right? We call Alexander the Great, Alexander the Great, but Alexander the Great killed many people, right? But because he was a warrior, I guess we remember him as a hero, not as a killer. The people whom he conquered, of course, well, that's actually complicated. I'll talk about that another time. I dislike Nietzsche because he likes the contemplation of pain, because he erects conceit into a duty, because the men whom he most admires are conquerors, whose glory is cleverness in causing men to die. But I think the ultimate argument against his philosophy, as against any unpleasant but internally self-consistent ethic, lies not in an appeal to facts, but in an appeal to the emotions. Nietzsche despises universal love. I feel it the motive power to all that I desire as regards the world. His followers have their innings, but we may hope that it is rapidly coming to an end. Right? So Bertrand Russell stands by a philosophy. He holds to a philosophy of universal love, something that Nietzsche despises, but something that Russell is prepared to, well, he wants to proclaim it to the whole world, right? A philosophy of universal love, something Nietzsche would never approve of. Then Russell says that Nietzsche's followers have had their innings. Okay, you have to remember, he's writing this in 1945. Okay, it's the end of the Second World War, and I think that the followers of Nietzsche he has in mind, the ones who have quote-unquote had their innings, I think he's talking about the Nazis. He's talking about Adolf Hitler and the Nazis, because Hitler was a big fan of Nietzsche. So they've had their time, but we may only hope that it is rapidly coming to an end. So hopefully the days of Hitler are coming to an end, and we'll never see anything like that ever again. That's what Russell is saying. Yeah, he wants that world of universal love, not that world of conquest by, by supermen, by Ubermensch, by people who regard themselves as superior and therefore better than everyone else. The ethical, as opposed to the political question, is one as to, sorry, let me start it over again. The ethical, as opposed to the political question, is one as to sympathy. Sympathy, in the sense of being made unhappy by the sufferings of others, is to some extent natural to human beings. Young children are troubled when they hear other children crying, but the development of this feeling is very different in different people. Some find pleasure in the infliction of torture. Others, like Buddha, feel that they cannot be completely happy, so long as any living thing is suffering. All right, and I want to talk about the Buddhist idea of the bodhisattva. The bodhisattva is an enlightened being who could become a Buddha, could enter into nirvana, right? The state of non-suffering. It's I guess comparable to the Christian idea of entering into heaven, but the Buddha, the Bodhisattva, cannot go into nirvana because he is called back to earth by the suffering, and he says that he will not abandon the suffering on earth until all the suffering on earth has come to an end. So the Dalai Lama would be a good example. At the time of this recording, in April 2026, he's 90 years old, but the present Dalai Lama is the 14th Dalai Lama. The belief is that every time he dies, he comes back to earth in order to help the people on earth. And his work will not be done until no one on earth is suffering ever again. Okay, so this is this Buddhist idea that one cannot be happy so long as any living thing is suffering, because the compassion that they have is just so, so great. Most people divide mankind emotionally into friends and enemies, feeling sympathy for the former, but not for the latter. An ethic such as that of Christianity or Buddhism, though, has its emotional basis in universal sympathy, right? So Christians love everyone, including their enemies. Buddhists love everyone, including their enemies. So these are two philosophies that are opposed to Nietzsche's philosophy. Nietzsche's philosophy, in a complete absence of sympathy. He frequently preaches against sympathy, and in this respect, one feels that he has no difficulty in obeying his own precepts. That's from Bertrand Russell's A History of Western Philosophy, 1945. Thank you very, very much.